Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our press conference today here in Seminole County. I'm Alan Harris, the emergency manager of the county. We, of course, have continued to follow the progress of COVID-19 coronavirus here in the county. As we said yesterday, and we've said throughout the entire event, we will continue to review and evaluate this event and take appropriate measures as necessary. Since the press conference yesterday, we have received some additional new data. Individuals have called in letting us know that while we still believe that a majority of our business owners and members of the public are following the guidance of CDC, we did find, unfortunately, some pockets that were not following the guidance, and unfortunately, some businesses that were not following the guidance. In addition, over the last day, we have had an additional 17 positive cases identified in Seminole County. As you all know that have been coming to our press conferences for a while, we have been, as a combined effort, developing an emergency response plan, and that plan was activated on our first case of COVID-19, and we've been following that plan. That plan included wraparound services, it included benchmarks, it included means for what we would do at certain levels of event, and we have tried to do, and we have actually followed that incident action plan appropriately. We wanted to take a measured approach to how we respond and how we issue executive orders, and today we are going to be issuing an executive order here in Seminole County. Our executive order changes the recommendations of the CDC to the enforcement of the CDC guidance. As part of this, we are still allowing businesses to operate as long as they follow these CDC guidances. The first is all employees and patrons must practice social distancing by staying at least 6 feet apart. Businesses can operate if group meetings, training sizes are limited to 10 people or less. Businesses can continue to operate with a limited occupancy of 30% of the maximum of allowable capacity of the fire code. There are 3 exemptions to this: non-residential, medical, and lodging. And checkout points and staging areas, including storefronts, must be monitored for social distancing requirements by means of marking the floor or similar actions to maintain the 6 feet distance between patrons and employees. There are some exceptions to the order. Those exceptions include first response agencies, governmental agencies, healthcare and medical. Obviously, you have to be closer to treat a patient than 6 feet. Veterinarian, to do care of animals, you may have to get closer to the client as you're working with the client and the animal. Shelters, rehabs, detoxes, child care facilities, utility providers as they're around working on specific types of utilities, food preparation, so restaurants can still continue to operate here in Seminole County and do the curbside or the takeout or delivery services, construction sites, and transit. We are also, as part of the order, requiring individuals to not gather in more than 10 persons. So if we see that in any parks or we have complaints or calls to service, then we will ask those individuals to separate no one 10 persons or more, again following the CDC guidance. There will be penalties to this. So as the sheriff talked about yesterday, we don't want to add additional individuals to our jail, and I know he's going to talk about that in just a little bit. So there are some civil penalties that will go along with this. If we find that this occurrence is, first, of course, will be public education. If the business or individuals do not follow the guidance, there could be fines up to $500 per occurrence, and repeated violence could be mandatory closure of the business pursuant to Florida statute. We believe that this is a measured approach. We believe that this can make a difference in our community. Where we've seen most of the large gatherings of individuals really have been at hardware stores and grocery stores, and we still want them to stay open, but we want them to practice social distancing. We've already been in contact with regional managers from most of the large grocery chains, and they actually like the order, and they are going to take steps to make sure that this order is followed in our county. The order will take effect on March the 30th, Monday, first thing in the morning at 12 a.m. So when individuals wake up and go to work on Monday, this order will be in place. With that, I'll turn it over to the sheriff for some comments.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for being here. I think my comments today are very similar to what I had shared yesterday. I think that the CDC guidelines are best practices. It's what's going to keep our community safe and healthy. It's what I and my family have been doing. I mean, the sign language expert is the closest person I've stood next to in the past week. I try to keep that distance at 6 feet distance, and I want to encourage everyone else to do that. We also want to be very clear that we want you to stay at home. I mean, the best and safest strategy is for you to stay at home with your family members. There are situations that are going to require you to go out. Those that go out, if you're going shopping, try to go alone. Try to leave your other family members at the house. And as we go through the groceries and the supermarkets, we're still seeing entire families shopping together. We want to kind of discourage that. Also, there's been some wonderful suggestions out there. And if anybody who owns or operates a grocery store in Seminole County wants to partner with members of our office, we'd be more than happy to lend resources. If you want to park a box truck in the parking lot, if you want to take those essential items, those paper goods, or those meat products, because I am absolutely convinced a majority of the people that are going into your stores 2 and 3 times a day are going there because they're trying to get those essential goods that are in high demand. So if you consider maybe making those services available on the outside of your store, it's going to cut down on that foot traffic. During yesterday's news conference and news briefing, I said that the most likely spot to transfer or catch the virus is probably in those most densely populated areas. And up until this point, there's very little going on in Seminole County after hours. There's no large gatherings that we were aware of. There was no calls for service. And quite frankly, many of our cities, it's like a ghost town at nighttime. Unfortunately, there is a small percentage of people that try to capitalize on an opportunity like this. When other businesses are self-imposing restrictions, furloughing employees, closing their businesses down because they truly care about the health and well-being of the members that work in their organization, there are some call centers and other areas that may not abide by those same rules. Alan Harris mentioned that there's a few phone calls coming in. I think all of us are now receiving some feedback from additional people who work with or other individuals that may not be having the comfort that a lot of people are having. Now again, that is such a small percentage, but yet I want to make sure that our law enforcement officers have some level of leverage that is meaningful, that does not require to put a person that potentially is at high risk in the back of a patrol car. I don't need to tell the public that that's probably the least safest thing that we can do for our public safety professionals, our law enforcement officers, and et cetera. And I talked about the high-risk environment of our correctional facility. Now again, we don't have anybody that is confirmed inside of our county jail. But in the event that there was, you can see how big of a problem that potentially could be. When somebody is asymptomatic in the beginning, that could easily spread around an environment like that. We want to do all that we can to minimize that potential. The sheriff's office, the code enforcement officers, all the police departments, the police chiefs, the mayors, and the city managers have been absolutely wonderful and collaborative, and I know our chairman is going to talk about that. So our intent here is to warn. If you miss one news broadcast at a state, local, or national level, you potentially are out of sync with the most recent recommendations and what is going on. Yesterday I said we will reevaluate this by each hour to determine what's going on in our community. So we want to do what we can. We feel this order is going to have the greatest effect on reducing the likelihood for exposure and spread. Again, it's going to limit gatherings of 10 people, no more than 10 people that are gathering, and I'm going to suggest you never do that. 2, it's going to put 30% occupancy in the supermarkets. Now, to put a number, I think it's actually hundreds of people can be in a public store at one time. So there's a pretty big window there for people to kind of get in and to participate with that. And we want to encourage people that if you know of situations or concerns, we always want to be accessible to you. So you can pick up the phone, you can call the emergency management hotline, you can call the sheriff's office, and we will always follow up on that. And last and certainly not least, because communication and awareness is a key with this, the people who are watching this either on live television or watching it streamed on one of the various networks or social media platforms, share this information with your network. Let's make sure that everybody in your neighborhood, in your community, in your associations are knowing the most current and recent information that we're doing here in Seminole County to protect and preserve your safety. So with that, I will turn it over to our county chairman, Jay Zembower.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, staff. Thank you, media, for being here, and thank you for the citizens of Seminole County who continue to have vigilant oversight on all the things that we all know we should be doing. Speaking of communication, we can't communicate enough, and this is what we've done leading up to this. We've had much communication with our business partners, as well as the regular citizens, our law enforcement, first responders, and as we indicated, we would be following this and taking appropriate action when and if necessary. As we've worked our way into this scenario and we found that there was some reports of these gathering, our staff has worked diligently, our legal staff, as well as our emergency management people, the sheriff's department, as well as your elected officials, in understanding what the scenarios were, but we wanted to ensure that it was not a vague and ambiguous document or set of rules or guidelines to go by that actually did enforce the intended purpose, which is really simple. The CDC guidelines are 6-foot spacing between people. Many of our and almost all of our businesses are practicing that. Some are not. As the sheriff indicated, this reduces occupancy to 30%. Now, what does that mean? That means that there are some businesses that may have an occupancy of 1,000. So 300, 330 people could be in there and cycling their way out. This also applies to the front of the building where people would tend to gather, waiting in lines and so forth. Like I said, most businesses are doing what they're supposed to do. We want to ensure moving forward that they all do what they should do. So with that, once again, I thank the citizens of Seminole County for doing the things that most of you are doing. We will continue to monitor it. If we need to take additional action, of course we will do so. So I'll take any questions.
Does this mean that places like Publix will have to limit the amount of shoppers and maybe paint squares on, like some of the food pantries have done?
So good question. So we know there are models, for instance, in California and other places where the larger box stores have actually put either tape or some kind of marking to help the consumers understand what 6 foot is. Not everybody understands 6 foot. I'm 6'1", so I get that height. But not everybody understands what 6 foot is. And I think when we have scenarios where businesses are taking best practice and helping people understand that is one of the best things we can do to limit that contact of coming into that personal space of that 6 foot area. So yes, they would certainly do that.
How are you going to enforce this?
So there's a number of ways. Code enforcement, as well as our sheriff's office, will be making the rounds and making sure, responding to any complaints. But the reality is, we're asking to be educating these people. Like I said, most businesses are already doing what they should be doing. They're taking the right steps. They don't want their employees to receive the virus, nor do they want their patrons to receive it also. But there are some that have not taken the appropriate measures, so we're taking that and asking them to please do it. We have no desire to fine or penalize anybody. You know, I would suspect by Monday, most everybody will be in the right place.
With the grocery stores, are they going to have somebody with a clicker as people go in, or how are they going to know if they have the 30% in there?
Like was said earlier, we've reached out to those large operations, the Publixes and the other chain operations. They seem to believe they can manage it, no problem. Others are managing it already. Costco, by example, is one that's been doing just this. Academy Sports is doing a similar scenario in their stores. So whether they count it manually with a clicker, we're not mandating how they do it. It's just good common sense on how do you count it. If you know what your occupancy is, then you can count it with a clicker and you'll staff it accordingly.
What has changed in the past few hours that you decided to do this now?
Nothing has changed in the last few hours. As we stated before, we continue to monitor it, and if tomorrow there is something else that is brought to our attention, either through our Sheriff's Department, our EOC, Citizens Hotline, and so forth, then our staff will look at that and all possibilities of what actions we need to take.
Can you say exactly
You
what it
said that-
was that prompted this? You mentioned a call center or other businesses that were not following the rules. What were those businesses that were not following the rules?
Sure, I can turn that over to Alan, because Alan mans that EOC call center, and he can share some of that with you.
Thank you, sir. So we're not going to call out any businesses, and quite frankly, a lot of the employees of the businesses that were calling in didn't want to give their businesses name out because there was no order like this to enforce anything. And they were afraid, of course, that they may be found out and their job could be at jeopardy. So we are going to have the Citizens Hotline. People can call the Citizens Hotline, again, 407-665-0000. And that's staffed Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. After hours, you can always call the Sheriff's Office non-emergency line, 407-665-6650, and then report that, and we would, the code enforcement or law enforcement officer, municipal law enforcement or the county, depending on where the business is, they would go out there. So we did receive quite a few phone calls. You know, some calls you don't know. With the amount of calls that came in, we have a good indication that it's not people just wanting to go home and work, that there are actually things that are out there that we didn't know about. We thought that we had good compliance. I still believe, that we do. Us driving around, we see that businesses are following the rules, but clearly there were some that were still making individuals work right next to each other. Even in one case that we had a call, they were even told to come in even if you're sick, which I can't even imagine in this climate that someone would say something like that. But we're going to follow up on those types of complaints, and if we need to, we'll take appropriate action.
There are some businesses that by design will not be able to comply with this, like hairdressers, nail salons. Did you guys talk about that?
Yes, so this does affect 3 areas. It does affect hair salons, it will affect tattoo artists, and it will affect massage. So those 3 industries, we understand this will be a hit to them, and we've already seen that in other counties. We don't like to affect any businesses, and we're not even saying that the businesses are negative or bad or anything like that. I go to a massage place every once in a while, but in this climate, it's just not safe.
So why not do just a blanket stay-at-home order like Orange and Osceola County? Because this pretty much seems basically
Very different, very different. We looked at theirs compared to ours. And I don't want to go county to county, compare to compare, and stuff like that. I'm not going to do that. This does not require certain types of businesses to close as long as they follow the CDC guidelines. So some of our small businesses are going to continue to operate in downtown Sanford, downtown Castleberry. They'll still be able to operate. They're operating in good faith. They are doing the right, appropriate things according to the CDC. Why should I close them down? Why should we close them down? They're doing a great job. Their employees are happy. They're working. They're doing appropriate things. We're only focusing on businesses that aren't operating based on the CDC guidelines. We believe through some statistics that the CDC guidelines can help to lower the curve. And that's why we've been, since day one, pushing the CDC guidelines. So the only thing that we're doing is we're changing from encouragement and recommendation to now enforcing it. You must follow the CDC guidelines.
We've seen the numbers increase daily here in Seminole County with is that also a factor?
Sure,
I think
absolutely.
they were like 40-something yesterday, now they're in the 50s?
Yeah, we're now at about at exactly 54. I think Donna Walsh is here with our Florida Department of Health, has been a great team member. We're at 54 now in Seminole County. That's up about 17 from the last 36 hours. So certainly that's one thing that we factored into this. There's a lot of things that go into any of these decisions. It's a very difficult decision, right? The chairman said it appropriately. No one has a incident action plan or a how-to on running a pandemic. So we have to make measured approaches. We have to look at the data. We have to look at the CDC guidelines, the scientists that are actually making these guidance type of calls, looking at the White House medical team that's putting out information as well. All of those together, looking at our medical director and his information, and then making the appropriate decisions. Our medical director also advised us that this was a very measured approach, and that he thought as well, and he talked to some of the other professionals in the field, that this may actually help to save some lives. So we're happy about it.
Are any of the people that you guys are monitoring or in quarantine, are there any firefighters or paramedics here in the county that are affected?
I'll ask Fire Chief Kenley to come up and answer any of those questions.
Good evening, Matt Kinley, Interim Fire Chief, Seminole County Fire Department. Yes, we do have five firefighters that are currently under self-quarantine. They ran a call that didn't have any indications of any kind of COVID-19 symptoms. After the fact, through our great partnerships with EM and the Department of Health in Seminole County, we were notified that that patient did test positive for COVID-19. So out of an abundance of caution, we've placed those on voluntary quarantine at their homes.
Do you know if any of those are because they had contact with anybody that they did a call on who had the COVID-19 or tested positive for COVID-19?
Yes, like I said, this was a patient that we ran on that did not have any signs or symptoms that are indicative of COVID-19. We were notified by the Department of Health that they did indeed test positive. Then later on, so we were able to backtrack to the crew that ran on it, and they're now at home in quarantine.
I can't thank everybody enough for being here, and understand this is not a stay-at-home order. We still encourage you to get out and ride your bicycle. You can get out on the trails. The trails and parks, for the most part, remain open. We encourage you to get outdoors. This does not mean you cannot go visit your neighbor. It does not mean you can't go visit your friend or your relatives. We still encourage, which is the best practice, is that if you're over 65 or you have underlying conditions, that you continue to try and attempt to stay home under all those circumstances. Again, this is not a stay-at-home order. This allows for the people to get out, as long as you're not in groups of 10, keep your 6-foot distance. Basically, the easiest way to look at this is adhere to the CDC guidelines, plain and simple. And again, we thank you all very much for being here.